Alrighty. So I'm going to get a little less technical than Peter's presentation. I'm going to step back a bit, and we're going to talk about estimating projects. So, how many people here ever have to tell your customer, either internal or external, how long something's going to take? If you don't raise your hand, you're not doing it right. So anyway,
Who's never gotten it right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's what we're going to get into. So at J Street, we work on projects of many different sizes. I would say anything from very small projects that just take dozens of hours, maybe 100 hours for something fairly small, and that would just be over a span of just a few weeks, all the way up to projects that I think we've gone over $1 million on a few projects. I'm not talking always about access projects, by the way, which I'll get into, but sometimes they're access, sometimes they're web projects. We use ASP.NET MVC for our web projects. Almost always SQL Server backend projects. So what we always get the question of is, can you just give me a ballpark, right? How many people have heard that phrase in one form or another?
Just take 2 minutes.
The corollary is, I won't hold you to it. Just give me a range, and I love ranges because I remember the high number for some reason, and you'll remember the low number. So anyway, this question comes up all the time. So the problem that we've encountered with all of our projects is that we need an accurate estimate to get approval for the project, but the accurate estimate takes time, which we don't have approval for. So that's our catch-22 that we always have. And then there's a cost to the inaccuracy. The cost, if it's too low, you're going to have the angry customer later. How many people have been in that situation in one way or another? Of course we have, right? Because it's going to be, if it's too low, you're going to get halfway through the project and you're going to realize the budget's almost gone. And that's going to be angry customer. However, you can't just say, I guarantee you it'll be under $1 million, because the customer will run away screaming most of the time. So if you estimate too high, the project doesn't go forward at all. So you're really kind of hosed either way. So you've got to figure this out in some kind of accuracy so that the project can actually go forward, but the customer is not going to be upset later. And I've been running J Street now for coming up on 24 years. And I can tell you right now, I don't have a perfect solution to the problem, but we've, over the past 5-ish years of that 24, we've started dialing in what we need to do for project estimating. That's what I'm going to present to you today. By the way, I haven't presented this ever anywhere before, also another world premiere. I'm going to be talking about some of this stuff in Vienna and in London coming up in April, and then at the end of April there's the Portland group, and I'll be talking about it there as well, but you guys get to be my guinea pigs. Okay, so here's all the ways that we build estimates. I'm sure you might have some other ones, but let's just talk about the ones that I've tried. Gut feel. Yeah, I know how much this project's going to take. It's very inaccurate, and it's usually low. And I have a theory on why it's low. And it has to do with me going out and working in the garage or on my car or whatever and telling my wife I'll be done in 20 minutes. One is it's very hard for me to comprehend all the complexities that may come up. And the other thing is, specifically in our industry, I don't think you would get into software development unless you were an optimist. There you go. I think that's it. I think we are a self-selecting, optimistic group because no one would put themselves through this unless they were an optimist. What we do, another way is, okay, we're just going to estimate each component individually. You're building a house, I'm going to add up the 2x4s and the sheets of drywall and the concrete, and I'm just going to roll it all up. And that's very time consuming, and our customers are not going to pay us for that. So I'm talking about looking at every single form, every single report, and individually going through all the detail and estimating it. That might be awesome, but we typically do not have time to do it to that level of accuracy. Roger?
Do you charge for the estimate and then roll it into the price? Is that what you're...
I'll get to that in just a second. Thank you. Estimate each feature area of the system, which I would call a top-down estimate. We used to do this. We used to say, well, the admin area will take this amount of time. Okay, you know, it's kind of like a gut feel, but on each major area of the system. So we'd be like, well, invoicing. Oh, I don't know, that sounds like 100 hours. You know, you just kind of do a gut feel, but on slightly smaller pieces. It's also inaccurate and it's also low because of the things I said before. It's very difficult to just say, well, you know what? The invoicing module, or whatever, that'll take X amount. You don't really know, let's be honest. We have to get in there and really figure out the details. Simple metrics, we used to do this for access applications. A long time ago I said, you know, I have found that access applications take about 10 hours per table. There's 12 tables, it's going to take 120 hours to build that project. And that's pretty inaccurate because there's different types of tables. What if 10 out of the 12 tables are lookup tables? Well, that's going to go faster probably. But what if there's a workflow process or something else in there that there's a lot of complexity? So it's not a great metric at all. We used to use it sort of as a little safety check for our projects just to see how they were looking, but it's not a good measurement. Compare to previous projects. Okay, when's the last time you did a project just like this one? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm in custom application development. There is no other project just like this one. That's the reason they called us, to work on it. So they're all unique, and it's also inaccurate because there's all the details that you're going to uncover that are different from. In my very first job, I had a manager that said, okay, can you make it just like this, except, and then he would add a whole long list of things that made it not really anything at all like that. And then there's also hope and pray, which I've done as well. Yeah, Adrian?
Go back to the previous one.
Yeah.
Could you take each component individually and then compare to previous projects?
Yeah, that's going to be getting in. You're stepping ahead a little bit, but that's going to be getting into a little bit about like how do we estimate, how do we get the mix of these things, and I'll get to that. And then there's hope and pray. So how many people have hoped and prayed on, yeah. One thing I'm not going to get into now is project management, and anyone who knows me at all knows that I'm a big proponent of estimated projects using time, and there's no materials, but it's always called time and materials. So we estimate our projects, and then we work toward the estimate, and we keep the customer in the loop if it's trending high. They don't seem to mind if it's trending low. But if it's trending high, then we tell them what's going on, and we allow them to simplify or postpone features to fit the budget. Now, how many people in this room have done hope and pray because you did a fixed bid project, and you got to deliver it, and then you're hoping and praying? So this is going to help as well if you start adopting the techniques I'm going to show. All right, here's what we came up with. I invented the terminology in our shop. We call it the shirt size method. We're all wearing shirts. I think everyone's wearing a shirt. There are shirt sizes. There's interesting things about shirt sizes. They are not linear. An extra small shirt, there's a strange like non-linear component to how they go up in size when you get up to triple XL. Okay? You could probably make 10 extra small shirts from a triple XL shirt or something. There's some weird non-linear sizing on that. So I thought, well, wait a minute, we need something to work with that is a concept that people can understand. And it's simple because remember I said we cannot afford to estimate every single individual 2x4 and piece of sheetrock in this house. We have to categorize things somehow. So we decided to do shirt sizes. So here's what we do, going back to your point, is we usually do an initial, what we call an architectural framework project. I've spoken at groups before, and we used to call it phase 0. And then we had this perception that our customers don't want to pay with something for something that has a 0 in the title. And then we called it a requirements assessment, and that just sounds like you're taking a quiz, and it sounds horrible. So we just renamed it. This is just branding. We just said, okay, we're going to call it an architectural framework. It's usually about 20 to 60 hours. We've had some that are larger than that, but we rarely have any that are smaller. So by the way, this whole technique I'm talking about today it doesn't really work for a whole project that might be 20 hours or 30 hours. So if you're doing something really small that you can do inside of a week, I wouldn't even do this technique because you can probably get your arms around the complexity of that project without doing this at all. Okay, and it is a paid activity, and often I tell customers, look, if you gave us $100,000 or $10,000 or $1 million, whatever the number is that I think is plenty, it's that ballpark I talked about, you're not going to hold me to it. If you just granted me that budget, I tell them, I assure them, what we would do at the beginning is this work anyway. Because I want them to understand that I'm not doing extra work, I'm just carving it off as a separate upfront phase. Does that make sense? I don't want them to think that, oh, we're doing this extra busy work, this project management, blah, 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 why don't you just start coding? I want them to understand, no matter what budget you gave me, we would do this first anyway. Okay. The name does help though. People understand frameworks and they understand architecture, at least as concepts, and so that helps smooth it out. And I would say for any project of any significant size, our customers go along with this. But you just have to talk to them and say, look, this is a valuable step. Teresa? Oh, sorry, Teresa.
So how much detail do you go in? Do you kind of identify the flow and the forms and the report?
Perfect question, I'll get to that. Yeah.
Do you bring, a lot of times when they ask you for something quick, right? Like, objective truth and subjective truth.
Right,
which one
right.
you want, right? So you say, this is the estimate built on these assumptions, these 5 assumptions. If any of those assumptions become skewed later on,
right,
you got some cover, right?
Right. In our project proposals, which I won't get into detail here, but we do say that the estimates we're giving you are based on our current understanding of project scope, and if the project scope changes, it'll always go up.
Yeah.
Then that will increase the estimate. Yeah. And I'll get to yours, Teresa. Perfect question, because that's what we're talking about. Very next bullet, so perfect timing. We screen flow all of the screens and the processes. And I will show you an example of that. In fact, let me flip to that right now. Here's an example screen flow, and we actually send this to customers. So what we do is we just identify the main menu. If this was a web application, there would be a login and a forgot password, etc. And we just screen flow it all out. And I'll talk about modules soon, that's what the colors are. But basically we're just showing what all the different pieces of the project are. And there's more to this. This one's I would say a medium-sized project. So we look at all these things and you can see that there's like an administration menu down here with administration screens and all that, right? This one happened to be for a web project, but I'm going to show you that this technique actually works for both, and because we do both types of projects, how many people here do web development? A few, right. So, as you start getting into this other area, there's differences. One of the reasons we're all Access developers is because Access is so fast. It's such a rapid development environment, so I'll show how we handle those differences. Okay, so back to the shirt sizes. So we screen flow and we make a screen flow diagram like that. Then we take and apply simple shirt sizes to each component. And we use basic complexity levels. So we'll look at a list form with a search at the top and we'll say, well, we've seen that before. So that's going back to some of that pattern recognition of like, well, we've all done an index form where it's a continuous form and you have a search at the top and there's multiple selection criteria and you double click and you drill down to the detail row. I mean, this is a form, there's a pattern there we do all the time. So we have some just basic sort of heuristics that we use where if it's that particular type of form, that's going to be, let's say, a medium. We just go, that's a medium. But there's 8 different drop-down boxes at the top where they all have to be combined together, and there's going to be some extra complexity there. That might be a large. So we assign those, and they're non-linear, like I said before. Non-linearly, I don't know if that's a word. But they increase in a non-linear way. Like I said, a large is it's not exponential or anything weird like that, but it does curve upward more and more as the sizes get bigger. Tim?
Have you considered just referring to this as a Fibonacci sequence? I know.
I won't refer to anything I cannot spell.
So Fibonacci, you just add the previous two. So
It's-
one, 2, 3.
I'll be interested
5,
in you
8,
looking at our
13.
numbers and seeing how it
Yeah.
follows that, because I have the grid and we'll look at that. And by the way, this grid, I'll have my email at the end, and if you want our spreadsheet, which I'm going to show, then I'll be happy to make it available to you, because I think we all need to get better at estimating. So, but yeah, thank you. You'll tell, maybe you can look at it and tell me, because I haven't thought of it in those terms. And it's honestly, we've actually worked through this trial and error, where we're just like, oh, that medium was not big enough for a web project, and so we've adjusted the numbers over time. So we'll have to see where they landed. And then, this is important. How many people, when they're doing estimating, and I'm going to raise my own hand because I've done this, they think in terms of how long will it take to code? Right? Because we're coders, we like coding. So we actually built a whole grid, and I'll show you that, where each shirt size, like a medium, has a coding column, but it also has all the other things you need to do. Requirements analysis, sketching, functional specs, testing, those types of things. So we try to make it sort of fully fleshed out so that we don't trap ourselves into the whole estimate is actually just the coding estimate, which is wrong. It's always low. We have to do all those things. So, and then we group related components into modules, and that's what I was showing you about. And I'll say this is about as agile as we get. We don't really have an agile shop in database projects. I've never really understood how true agile development with really rapid sprints would work when you have to have a database with 150 tables underneath it and being able to iterate that way. So what we do is our sprints are more like, 400-meter runs or whatever. They're not quick sprints. And they're 4 to 6 weeks long, maybe 100 to 200 hours each is generally roughly how we do it. And those are the color codes I showed you. So when you saw these colors, those were the different, those modules over there were roughly broken up that way. And they're similar they're similar groups or areas, and the important thing is they can be demonstrated together. Because what we do is as every module comes into the station and the coding is complete, we do a walkthrough with the customer and we actually show them the working code. We don't throw in the keys yet because there's areas in this house that you cannot step because you'll fall through the next floor. But we call it a hard hat tour. We'll take you through, you put your hard hat on, these things are not all working, but we walk through it. And we do that module by module. Okay, so, and then we add, beyond all, the other thing we tend to forget is, did we think about data conversion? Oops. We can't just tell the customer what it's going to take to code the system and then have no data in it. Unless that's what they want, and they might want to load it themselves. But we have to add overhead work. I call it overhead. It's really just beginning, ending, and all the way through work. There's stuff you do at the beginning, there's stuff you do at the end, like deployment, maybe some training, maybe some data conversion. And then there's all the way through, which is project status reports and project management, things like that.
So you're not even talking about legacy data laundering in that step, are you?
In data conversion?
Yeah.
Well, if it's bad data, which it almost always is, then the data conversion can be heartbreakingly long.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I've run into this problem that.
Every
the whole
time.
data conversion piece isn't even estimated, right?
Yeah,
They
and
don't
that one that is kind of a gut feel, but we do analyze the data and we see how bad it is. And what we do is we just, as bad as it is, we add 50% more or maybe double it. And then we tell the customer, you can hire temps, you can key it in yourself, you can whatever you want to do, but this is what it's really going to take. And data conversion is the task that I always say, if you do it perfectly, nobody notices anything. It's like, great. So, George.
Real quick, at one point, we did a data conversion project for D&D, and Eric used the remodel versus new construction analogy to explain why it's going to take so much longer to move their data from the 5 crappy Access databases into SQL Server.
Yeah.
And the guy happened to do remodeling as a hobby,
Yeah.
and he got it.
He just got how that works.
He got why that was.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into that. There's a whole area about data conversions, but what I'm saying is, if you forget it, you're gonna be sorry. So that's why we always have this structure that reminds us. Yeah, Teresa?
And another way, well, one of the ways I handle that is, it's a caveat that, and like you said, you could mention, here's some options, but the project, the development and all of that, is this estimate in your data conversion, because you keep, you know, however, especially when it's in something that's HIPAA, so you don't even get to see it all until, holy
That's
cow.
another.
Yeah, and so
Crazy
that's
thing,
one
yeah.
thing, is to make sure you just have that as a separate, because you need to isolate that.
Right.
And you can't change it, but where in there have you addressed all the really nitpicky customizing forms and the placement and the color?
So what we do is back up with shirt sizes. So the question is, what about like you have a really unique form or a unique workflow or something that's really complicated? I mean, we had a report one time for a project that we had to mimic or duplicate an existing work order, and it was the most complex thing I have ever seen and have ever seen. And it took hundreds of hours to build this one report, because it was to the point where there were tiny images and there were different fonts and there were boxes, and if the text didn't fit in the box, it had to say, oh, see next page, and you had to take the text and put it on the next page, and we had to build it all into a beautiful PDF that could wander around the shop floor and be updated by people manually. And we were just like, it was insane. Well, that was one of the top level shirt sizes, which is gigantic, but we have to just understand it and look at it, and conversion's the same way, and those types of forms. We look at that and we go, whoa, like that's a unique animal, that's gonna be a triple XL.
Oh, and that's one of the, but the question that also comes up, similar to that, is where it's a very, seems like it's a flippin' straightforward form, and then the customer says, but this has to be exactly for my boss who's computer illiterate, now change all these things.
During design or early on when
Well,
you're
they get to
establishing
every time.
requirements?
Well,
So-
every time, we don't know they're gonna change that.
Well, okay, so that's-
Until they get to use it.
So that's, oh boy, well, that's another entirely thing, a different thing. If, what we do is, we design everything before we code it. So I don't know if that's a shocking revelation to you guys. But we actually sketch it out in Visio and we approve it, and then people still say, but I can't actually get my hands on it. But we try to walk them through those processes, and 90%, 95% of the time, the screen that's coded matches the screen that's sketched so well, and they understood it so that they end up using it and it's fine. But I agree with you. But then what we do is we go back to them and say, all right, you're making changes to what was designed, which you green-lighted, so therefore that's a change. We don't call them change orders, but that's a variance, and that's going to affect the budget.
That's a good approach.
Yeah, yeah. I'll move on, and then we'll just keep going with questions. By the way, I'll be available at lunch to talk about this stuff, because I know it riles up people. Okay, so let's talk about using the estimating tool, and then what I'll do is I'll flip over again to open this sample project. All right, so first of all, I'm going to walk through the steps and then I'll flip over on how we use the tool. And again, in this amount of time, I can only sort of fly over this tool. I can't get into too many details, but I want to answer questions of specific things that come up. But then you can always look at this and analyze it later. And again, kind of like Peter said, it's an internal tool for him. This is an internal tool for us that I'm showing you. So if there's rough edges or things that you would do differently, awesome, improve it. Maybe I'll take it back from you someday in better shape. Okay. First of all, here's the tool, and again, with the zooming, it's going to be. Is this the case, Kevin, where should I change my ratio?
You can scale down in Access.
Or in Excel?
Yeah, Excel.
Yeah, I'll do that. That's still really good.
That's better.
That works.
Okay, well, let's play with that, and if I have to change it more, I will. All right, so first of all, the end result is, and I'll get into more of this later, but the end result is this grid right here. So the point is to be able to create a budget, and this just has a bunch of sample numbers and rates and everything. So you can see this is a pretty big project, it's over $200,000. but this will work for a $20,000 project or a 200 or 2 million. It's not really, doesn't really care. But what I really want to get into first, and then we'll work up to what this end, this is the cake after it's been baked. This is what you can copy and paste into your proposal. Okay? But how do we get here? How we get here is the first step I mentioned on the slide. Sorry. The first step I mentioned is copy the grids for Access or Web. So this is what we do. We go into the estimating tool and we say budget detail. And now you can see there's all of these lines of detail here. This is the overhead stuff at the beginning. We call it module 0 because it's like set up a framework, finish the database design, do all that kind of stuff. And then we get down into module 1 and start going down the chain. So what we do is we take the screen flow that we already built and we put all those modules into here and then start deciding what shirt sizes they are. Now, before we do that though, we say, is this an Access project or a Web project? Yeah, question.
So do you call it module 0 and they see that? Because I thought they had an issue with like phase 0.
Yeah, but they have an issue with phase 0 because they've never worked with us before. By the time we identify module 0 and we talk about it as being a sort of an overall architecture of the project, and there's some startup time in getting it ready, especially on the web. Access is very low. We have app framework navigation, 12 hours, and then if there's more database design, construction, and review, we'll put it in there with an estimate. But with the web, there's a lot more. Setting up a web project and getting it all ready to go is more complicated, so it has more. So what we do at the very beginning is decide which type of project it is, and then we have 2 areas. So you see over here on the right, we have this grid here for web, and then down here we have for Access. So this is really pretty simple. You take the grid, you copy it over into the area, into the main area, and we have handy dandy reminders here. Copy for web solution, copy for Access solution. So I can take this grid here and say, well, if it's a web solution, I'm going to grab this grid, copy it, and paste it right in here. So notice it's the same color, so even someone like me can do this. Thankfully, I have a couple of really good design analysts on our team, Kathy and Joe, and they live in this sheet in the early days of the project, and so they had to make it even easy enough for me to use. So I can take all this, I can put this in here, and I can paste, and notice all the numbers just pasted in from that grid. So think of this as a template of numbers that we're going to use based on whether it's Access or Web. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that change because I want this to be an Access project. So it'll go back to this more modest set of numbers. This is actually like, well, if you want proof that web projects take longer than Access projects, this is what we've learned the hard way over time. And we did one where the customer went through the entire thing and said, I want it to be Access, because we said that'll save you money and you could use it internally in your shop or RDP or whatever. We gave her all the pros and cons. And then she said, oh, actually, I want to know what it's going to cost to do it as a web project. And we said, got you, we're going to do this. So we went through and we just redid the grids and double checked the sizes, because sometimes there are things that are very specifically different for Access and Web. But for the most part, the grids just come over with the same shirt sizes, and the project doubled. So it's 2x, almost 2x. Yeah, question?
So what are you using for the web development? You're not talking about Access web apps.
I will never talk about Access web apps again. No, we use MVC, ASP.NET MVC Core, which is the current technology that we're working with now. And of course, SQL Server backend database. Okay. So here down here, there's these grids, and basically what it is let's say for a web solution here, this hardly ever changes. This is the baseline right here. So these grids hardly ever change, but the bottom line is, you know how I said you never estimate something based on only construction? But yet we often think in terms of construction, because at the core of it, we have to program things. So what we do is we say, well, it's 18 hours of construction, and then we extrapolate all the other things we do based on 25% more of construction, 33%, 20%, and 15%. So you notice functional specs is about a quarter of the length of what we think construction will be. I know, is that backwards? Yeah, it is. But we're thinking in terms of construction. How much is it going to take to hammer it together? And then say, well, if it's 18 hours of construction, it'll probably take about 4.5 hours of functional specification. That's FS, functional specs. RA is requirements analysis, SK is sketching, and then there's testing. So then we end up over on the right with shirt size hours. Now here's your sequence, Tim. So we have not applicable, which means it's a quick way to zero it out, but then we're going up 193, 386, you can see it climbing. So that we could apply math to that and see what it's like. But notice how all those numbers are very precise. I always tell my team, and I try to say it over and over again, but precision implies accuracy. So if I see something 0.37, that implies that I'm very precise on my estimate, which is completely nonsense. So that's just math, right? So what we do is we copy this grid over to this grid, and this grid, we just take those same numbers and we say, well, instead of saying it's 11.88 hours, we say it's 12. And we just fudge it a little bit. We don't do automatic rounding because I want to think about this. So we take this grid and we build these. Now, this is not something we do for every project. Think about this as this is my raw material. These are my numbers that I'll use moving into the future.
Yeah, that is really close to Fibonacci. If you look at every previous two, if you add them together,
yeah,
it's very close. It's easier to see if you look at the far left column because you have nicely rounded numbers.
Here?
But yeah, almost every one is, you take the previous two, add them together, and you're pretty close to the
Did we somehow land on the Fibonacci sequence?
Very close.
No, it's like a double.
And my presentation is complete. Yeah, so anyway, we have worked on this. I wish you told me about the, we have worked on this for a long time, and this is just what we've ended up with. So it would be very interesting and strange if we ended up that way naturally.
The pattern shows up all over in nature. That's why it's so common that this fits.
It's great. So, okay, so same grids down below, but you notice that the numbers are all different. So the biggest, oh, by the way, we invented, because of that stupid report, we invented Jumbo XL. We decided there was too many X's, and so we went to JXL.
Jumbo burger.
A JXL is 342 hours on the web up there, and it's only 91 hours in Access. So you see how it just really expands. The more complicated your project is, the more of a factor of multiplication you have to use for estimating on the web versus Access. So think of it as it just stretches out. Simple things are both, they're simple on web and Access, but as you get more complex, the distance increases. Okay, so to go back, we copy the grids. That was copying the grids. Now, we load all the components and assign shirt sizes. Now what we do, and that's back over here, way over here, and then going up in this detail sheet, notice all these modules. I'll go way up, we're down in module 11. So we just loaded with 12 modules. We haven't really had any projects that are more than about a dozen modules. You could always add more grids. But see up here, module 3, invoices. This invoice, we have this nomenclature. It means it's a search form, a detail form. So these are just kind of reminding us what kind of forms we're talking about. They could be on the web or in Access. We just call them all forms. You can see over there that this is a medium. But if we have a conversation internally and we say, you know, that actually is a large, then we just change the L, the M to an L, and we grab all those values in and we load that row with whatever came out of those grids that we copied in, right? So we're just reusing these grids over and over again of this sequence that we built. So we do all that, and we go through, and you have to make sure you remember everything. So this is what my analysts do, is they look at it and they go, okay, did we get everything? Is it on the screen flow? Did we come up with everything? And we add it all up. Now, we found over time that if you just do this mathematically, you're going to be wrong sometimes for a different reason. You would think it would be accurate, but a lot of times there's synergy involved. Like I'm going to make 5 small forms or 5 medium forms, but they're not going to take that long because honestly, by the time you do multiples, you can copy from your own work and there's synergy involved, or when you do a whole group of things, sometimes there's other things at play. So what we do is first of all, we say if a few seem low, we throw in a higher one. I know this is a little fudgy, okay, I get it. But what happens is you'll have a series of small forms and you'll be like, you know, my gut's telling me that one of these is going to go off the rails. So what you do is we often arbitrarily will say, you know what, let's just throw a medium in there as one of them. What we don't want to do is second guess the numbers on each of the sizes because then we're going back to estimating everything, which just takes too long. But we do this quickly. We just look at it and we go, yeah. Well, let's throw in another medium just to give ourselves some room. And then we also note that if, like in that case of, well, I'm going to build 3 reports, but you can start with the first one and then copy them and make alterations, then we call it adapted. So we'll make a note and we'll adapt it. So we'll have a report that's large, and then we'll have variation 2 and 3, and they'll be small, and we'll say adapt next to that report name because we know it's adapted from something else. Okay, so we do that. Now we adjust the summary totals if desired. And so what we do is we look for the synergy of related components. Maybe it's not going to take as long as all of them individually. Again, precision implies accuracy. So we look at it and we go, this is too precise. This looks too accurate. Okay? You don't want it to look too accurate. You want it to be sort of round numbers. And then I'll show you how this works. So what we do is we look at a shirt size module. I'll go back up to module 1. Here's module 1, and I look at this grid, and I say, here's all these things, and I've made all of my smalls and mediums and everything. And you see how it says total hours 168.2. Go, too accurate. It's not that accurate, so it's too precise. So what we do is on the next line down, I'll move this up the screen a little bit. On this next line down, we have this line here that says 0 because we haven't done anything. This is our adjustment line. So this is the mathematical calculation, but this one's the one that, this is what we say is where it's going to be. So what we do is we don't update this line. You see it's a sum up in the formula. We actually go into construction and we say this one's going to be 90. This one, you know what, these functional specs, they're not going to take 20 hours. These are all simple screens. Added up they do, but they're also similar. We can copy and paste a lot, so I'm going to make that 10 hours total. The requirements analysis, yeah, that's high. It's going to be 20. Now sketching, some of these are complex, so I'm going to go ahead and keep, I'm going to put 20 hours in there.
This is really math versus gut feel.
This is our adjustment of does it feel right? We're not going to be blind and just go with the math. We're going to say, you know what, let's think about this intelligently. This is our chance to make adjustments. So, and then testing with first pass, I'm going to call that 4 hours. So you notice that this 168 came down to 144. Okay, cool. Now, if I go back to the budget summary, you notice that module 1 switched from initial to adjusted. So what we do is we sense if there's a 0 in that field, we say it's initial. That's mathematical, what it initially came up with. But as soon as we override it with something, we switch to adjusted. So when Kathy or Joe and I are looking at these, we look at these and we say, okay, have we made our gut feel adjustments or not? So we work through this. And then because they're not all initial or all adjusted, down here at the bottom it says blend. There's a blend of the mathematical numbers and the adjusted numbers. Okay. The other thing we do is, I think I said that. Okay, so that's adjusting the summary. Then we adjust rates as desired. Now, there's something we do, a little tip I can give you guys. $99,800, and by the way, you can add or remove zeros to this as you like. I mean, if you're working on small projects, the same concept appears. I would love to get a $100,000 project, and we do get them, but we also get $10,000 projects. It's okay. I'm just talking about generally speaking. 99.8 seems way lower than 100,000 point $100,200, right? It's only 0.4% difference. So what I always tell my team, and I think about it myself, is I cannot adjust how long the project will take because it takes what it takes. My goal is to estimate it accurately. But what I don't want to do is think, oh, the customer doesn't have the budget, so I'm going to just start carving hours off. I can try to carve features off to lower it, but I can't just magically make it take fewer hours, right? It's just not going to happen. If you go down that line of thinking, you're going to be in for heartbreak because you're going to be off. So what we do is we sometimes come out with something that's just over what I call a price boundary. And this is a psychologically known thing. If you're just, that's why televisions or cars or whatever cost something 999 instead of the whole number. It's because psychologically it seems lower to us, right? Even though really it's not much. So this is where you can play with your rates, and I will flip over and show you. And because I'm among friends here and we're all developers and we all want to make money if we're consulting. By the way, how many people here do any consulting at all in there? Whether you're also an employee or not. Almost everyone in the room does consulting, at least in part or in whole. So rates are very important, right? So we have a rates and variables. Now, our top rate for small projects, and especially if I don't particularly like the customer, is $220 an hour. But here's the thing, is if you're just over a price boundary, you're like, it's going to be, I'm going to give you 10% off or even 2% off or something. I'll come up with something to get it, especially if I feel like there's going to be pushback on the price and it's going to be a tough sell. Then again, I'm not going to magically lower the number of hours. I might remove features and say that these things, that you can't afford them, so we're just not going to have them. In phase one anyway, always promote, there's always a phase two. You can always have a wish list of things and we identify them. But then I can mess with these numbers. And you notice there's a few rates that are different in here. I can arbitrarily say that some things are cheaper than others. Like I may say, project management, writing up status reports and all that, I might say that that's lower. So I maybe make that 160. Or maybe I have someone who's not a full developer, but just running testing, doing first pass testing, making sure everything's looking okay. Maybe that isn't as expensive either. The bottom line is it's very granular. You can put in whatever rates you want for whatever things you want here, and all of the columns in the other sheets are tied to these particular activities. So you can change rates and it just changes the project. So for example, if I say all of these are 180, and I just grab a bunch of them and I change them like that, then if I go back to the budget summary, my project's changed quite a bit. So I can see, oh, I'm at 205. Ooh, I'm just over a price boundary. I can keep playing around with this and finding something that comes in at 199, 999. Right? Make sense? So that's what we do. Getting toward the end here, and I can open it up for questions. And at the very end, like I told you, the cake was already baked. Once you have that, you go back to this, and this is a nicely formatted summary. Notice we don't grab all this. This is just basically diagnostic data. We're just looking at all this and trying to figure out what's going on. But I can take this client, I put in the client and project name, grab this, da-da-da, and I hit copy, and then I go into my Word document or an email or whatever, and I hit paste. And it's clean, nice, it's the top level numbers, but yet it all rolled up from these assumptions that we had under the covers. So.
And it's a very professional presentation, and that really goes a long ways towards acceptance and confidence of the client.
I tell people all the time, and I talk to clients all the time, because I'm the primary, Joe in my shop also handles some of these too, but I handle most of the inbound sales leads. And within 5 minutes of the conversation, I'm talking to people about budget. I try to talk about budget right away, because that's a really quick disqualifier. And I heard a really good salesperson one time who was trying to sell me on something, and he said, Armen, because I was on the fence, I was like, I'm not sure I want to go forward or not. He said, Armen, my second favorite answer is no. And I was like, wow. That was like a little, So I've actually told customers that, but I've also just tried to get to know as quickly as possible. So if you guys are in the business at all of actually being in the sales process in any way of selling your own work, get to know as fast as you can, because that frees your time and energy up for the S's that are out there. And I'm not a big trained salesperson or anything. This is just what I've learned over time. So yes, the professional approach and just being confident in your numbers, and this technique that we've built up over time has built our own confidence in our own numbers. So I'm going to open it up for questions, thoughts.
I'm just going to play, devil's advocate, right? Because I see this a lot in many different companies where there's a detailed estimate from company A, there's a detailed estimate from company B, company E. Sometimes they don't even look at them, they're looking at the totals. Because the devil is in the detail, and understanding the detail. And if you as submitting something like this, you have to understand why something is, the ratios are like this or that or this or that.
Right.
But I think another important number that I think a lot of us miss, and it's business, this is business, right? I'm gonna tell you right now, it's like, what is it worth to my client? And to translate that is, what kind of value is it creating for your client? I have so many clients that I wouldn't have budget for that. I said, okay, you know, knowing that they gotta have this, right? So it's kind of, it's a ratio thing, because who's worked on a project that, you know, the client has a budget of, for example, $100, but you know it's a $1,000 moneymaker year over year, right? So you have to somehow factor that in.
Right.
And I would say you would want some sort of variable within your model as well.
Yeah, of ROI you're talking about? Like what's the return?
Right, that's a measure, yes.
Yeah, because what we do, what I tell customers is I say, look, I'm going to tell you how much I think your project is going to cost. It is completely disconnected from what value you are going to receive. Because I've had customers that I say it's $100,000 and they go, oh my God, that's a no-brainer, let's start. Okay, and I've had other
You
customers
just
that I
sold
say,
yourself short though.
well, but I've had other customers where I say it's $10,000 and they go, oh, we can't possibly afford that. It's not worth it to us. I'm like, okay, good.
The second best answer is no, at least you
Yeah,
know.
at least we know. So that's why I always tell people, it's up to, I can help you discover ROI, but I cannot tell you what your ROI is until you give me all the information and we work on it together.
And a lot of times, I mean, I dealt with, you know, the big guys as well as a lot of the little mom and pops, right? And business owners. And I'm just in a case right now where my customer's saying, gosh, you know, it's getting expensive. You told me a month ago it was going to be, you know, and I know this guy needs it really bad. And I know it's worth a lot to him.
Right.
And to have that conversation with your customers, we're only talking about one side of the coin. I'm being upfront with you. You know, I want to look at the other side of the coin. How do you value this? And you'll get a lot of, because maybe they haven't done it formally or that sort of thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, just thinking in those terms is really, really important.
Yeah, it's always good to try to find the value, and we do work with our customers on coming up with value, and it's a little loose sometimes, a little fuzzy, but you can work on it and justify these numbers. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go back there.
So are you always charging the actual hours, or do you
when we're working,
guarantee a maximum for your
Oh
projects?
boy, this is a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
Not to exceed is the same thing as a fixed bid, except you get the high side and I don't, if you're the customer, right? So I'm going to somehow cap myself, but yet everything underneath that is time and materials? No. I would say not to exceed is even worse than a fixed bid. At least with a fixed bid, I have some upside that I could maybe finish it sooner and make extra money per hour. So yeah, we don't do not to exceed. We do charge for every hour, and we only have 2 exceptions in our shop. Is if a competent developer wouldn't have done that mistake, then we don't charge for the hours. We just absorb them. And the other one is if we have a new developer coming up on a new technology for them, then we estimate J Street hours on what we think that would have taken by one of our other developers, and we limit ourselves to that for this new developer who's coming up to speed. So that might take them 8 hours, but the J Street time would have been 2 hours. So we just charge for 2 hours. And usually our customer knows there's someone coming up to speed and we're absorbing some of that time.
Well, what do you do when they ask you to make that a not to exceed?
I say no. No, honestly, I just say no, because if people, I know there are some fixed bid proponents in the room, I'm not gonna name names, but I know from talking to my co-MVPs, that other MVPs, that there are some, and there's a way to manage that as well. We just happen to be a time and material shop with a few exceptions. There are some exceptions. Sometimes I'll do that architectural framework on a fixed bid, because they wanna know that the beginning number is fixed, but I hope they don't get hooked on it for later, right? Just time for a couple more questions, we're running over. George?
How do you feel about high-low? This would be the minimum, this would be the maximum.
There is no minimum, well, there is a minimum, I guess,
I mean,
but there's no maximum.
So you don't say this could be between 16 and 24 hours, probably around 20? Or?
If I do, then I always reiterate, including in writing, that this is a rough scoping estimate. A lot of times companies understand the concept of a scoping estimate. This is like, do I make a go or no-go decision based on this estimate? But I know it's not accurate until we do this process. But yeah, and I don't like ranges. I usually just say, look, this could be $40,000, but it might be more, and we'll only know when we do this initial work. Yeah, honest.
Just wanted to follow up on your question. What we do at our shop, which is in Denmark, so it might be different. When we have kind of not to exceed, what we tell them is we can promise to keep it at this budget, but as we start developing, if we find out something's going to take longer, that means some features are going to get cut. We'll help you decide which features you want to cut. What we don't say cut, usually we say, let's do this in phase 2.
Yeah, postpone. Yeah, we say simplify or postpone. We never say cut. That sounds horrible. Simplify or postpone, and we do have we call those budget-centric projects, and then we take the last 3 things and we say these are on the bubble. If we have enough budget and time permitting, we'll do them, but we try to postpone the design of those features until the end because we don't know if we're going to have the budget. But that's when you have a not a penny more type of budget, and then you have to make sure that there's a chunk at the end that the project will be useful and deliverable without those things, because they're going to end up in phase 2 if you run out. So, Kevin, really quick?
Yeah, so on your quotes now, you come up with like, oh, it was 1,055 hours, and then here's what that's going to cost.
Yeah.
If they back up and do the math, it might be like, why am I paying $193.27 an hour?
Oh, I didn't cover that. We actually have a little grid in our project proposal where we say that there's different activities that are at different rates. So we just mentioned that, but yeah, you're right. It doesn't actually show up it's not easy to do the math. Think of it as a blended rate.
Yeah.
But we actually do have another grid that shows the specific rates.
And you show that to the client?
Yes, because they're going to see it later on their invoices.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Any particular reason you didn't do the tool and access?
Any particular reason we didn't do the tool and access? That's a good question. I think because of all the just built-in formulaic calculations that were so easy in Excel. We just did it that way.
Typically Excel big.
This is something Excel really is excellent for it. But yeah, all of the data, the raw data could have been in there, but yeah, wow, really? That was a cheap shot, Roger.
Are you ever trying post-mortem meetings to improve your matrix?
Yes, so what we do is we look through the project, they answer the questions, do we look at a project afterwards? I don't like post-mortem. Hopefully the project doesn't go like that. But
debrief.
It's alive and well, it's a debrief, and we actually do. And especially when we start a new project, we'll look and we'll say, okay, how did we do on the last project that was sort of a similar scope? And we'll adjust those grids. So that's the place to put them, is those grids down at the bottom where we go, it seems like every time on a web project, what we say is a large really takes more time. Or we say, let's look for new things that make it a large instead of a medium. Like what are some factors that come into play to do that? So,
very much on a similar thing, it seems like if you had a central place where those numbers were stored, after they get updated, so it's always being updated, you could store that in something like Access and have the Excel link into it.
You could if it was something that was really dynamic. We find that this is really static except for the actual modules, the actual items, the components. Some of those are reused, like login screens and things, but they're always on there. That's why we keep a few of them on there as examples. But yeah, it could be in a database. We just, We still do Q&A documents in Word. We do Q&A documents. We have questions and answers, and we keep track of them, and there might be hundreds of them in there, but boy, talk about an easy format to just send to your client and say, hey, there's a bunch of empty ones. You know, so there's all kinds of other ways to do it, and then kind of like Peter was saying and other people have said, it's like sometimes you go for the practical because we have other work to do. So there's always ways to improve it.